Good evening, class. Welcome to our Anatomy 260 lab class. Today we're going to study a very important organ in the human body. And what is that organ? What is this organ, class?
Brain.
The human brain, right? Do you know that your brain contains billions of neurons, or what we call nerve cells? It does, okay? Now, when you become future nurses, bear in mind that you will be dealing with patients that involves pathology or diseases of the brain, such as what? A stroke, or if not, traumatic brain injury. How many of you drive a motorcycle here? What about a car? Okay, yes. If you run at 100 miles per hour, is it possible to have traumatic brain injury? Could you damage your brain? Okay, definitely. Now, the course learning objectives for today include the three things. Number one, we need to know the structure and lobes and function of the lobes of the brain. Number two, the structure and function of the meninges that protects the brain. And thirdly, of course, review of the skull that protects the brain too. Make sense? Okay. Now let me share with you a story about myself. Before I graduated from medical school, I was a 10-year-old boy who wanted to know about the brain at our library. And our library had a lot of books. I went to an American missionary school in the Philippines, and apparently they have a lot of books that came from the United States. I want to know what's the basis for memory. How come we have short-term and long-term memory? So even though at that young age, I already know that the brain is not really smooth, but rather it has what? Folds, right? And grooves. Now what do you call the folds of the human brain, as you can also see here? We call them folds are gyrus. What about the grooves? Sulcus. Very good. See? So what is the purpose of this, Jose? Why is it there is the presence of the folds and the grooves?
More surface area.
More surface area, perfect, right? So our brain has the capacity to store more information because of the fact that it can store more information because of the increased surface area. Makes sense, okay? So at that time when I was 10 years old, I said, wow, how come there are people who are able to remember things quite fast, you know? People have a hard time memorizing things. Some have an easy way of memorizing things. So I wanted to know what is the basis for memory. How come the brain is important in creating memory? It's been what? I'm now 58, it's 48 years ago. Up to now, I'm still fascinated with the human brain. Now we know more about the brain because of the advanced technology of functional magnetic resonance imaging. We have what we call positron emission tomography scans, or PET scans. Isn't that amazing? Okay? So again, today we're going to talk about the structure, functions of the brain, structure, functions of the skull, which protects the brain, and the structure and the layers of the meninges, right? Right now in front of you, you have I want you to take a look at your skulls, right? And your brain model there. You go along with me. If you remember last time, we said that the skull and the brain have the same names. What do I mean by that? If you remember, the skull has what? What is the name of the part of the skull in front? Frontal bone. What about on top? Parietal. What about here? Occipital. What about on the side? Temporal bone. So this is exactly the same name of the lobes of the brain. What is the lobe in front? Okay, what about on top? Same thing, parietal. What about at the back? Occipital lobe. And the one on the side? Temporal lobe. Now, what is the function of the what is found in the frontal lobe? Anybody? Yes? Motor cortex. Mireya, what is found in the occipital lobe? What cortex would that be? Occipital lobe. Visual. Perfect. What about the temporal lobe? Miss Cruz? Hearing, auditory cortex. And finally, yes, my dear, what is for the parietal lobe? Function? Sensory cortex. Very good. Okay? Now, so, based on that knowledge, let's do a small quiz. Put your answers on your... I provided you with, as you can see there, I provided you with the whiteboards, right? And I want you to be able to write down the answers, okay? If I say the question, I'll give you 5 seconds to answer the question, and then write down the answers, okay? Just put the name. Where do you find the motor cortex, class? Where do you find the motor cortex? Go ahead. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Raise your whiteboard, please. At the back, whiteboard, where's your answer? Perfect, frontal. What about the visual cortex? Where is it found?
Occipital.
Where is it found? Write it down. Okay. Very good. Occipital lobe of the brain. Now for the meninges, there are 3 layers. The first layer up on top would be what? The dura mater, then arachnoid mater, then pia mater. Which one is the innermost layer? Which one is the outermost layer? Which one is the middle layer? Arachnoid. Okay? So it's very important to know this thing because they are the ones that protects the brain, right? What protects the brain? The meninges and the skull. Okay? So you might be wondering, of what importance would this be, Dr. Gamo, to me? When you become future nurses, are you going to be dealing with patients with traumatic brain injury? Yes. Definitely. How many of you have relatives or friends who had traumatic brain injury? Raise your hand. Thank God. What about those people with strokes? You have. Who suffered a stroke in your family? Your grandmother? Okay. And what about you?
My neighbor.
Your neighbor. Okay. What about you, Jose?
Grandmother.
Your grandmother too. So what was the paralysis? Left side or right side?
Left side.
Left side. Did they undergo rehabilitation?
Yeah.
Yes, they did. Okay, so physical therapy, occupational therapy, right? So apparently the purpose of this class is to lay down the foundation of nursing. If you know your anatomy, then you should know your what? Pathology or abnormal condition. Is that clear? So today, we're going to dissect so we have the brain model there. I want you to study. You can study that. Go ahead. You have the specimens of the brain. Okay. I want you to dissect the brain. Go ahead. Second group, dissect the brain. And the third group at the back, dissect the brain. And what do you notice? It has a lot of grooves and folds, right? Okay. You can see that your grooves and folds are important in as much as you can see there that they are seen. Even though this is a ship's brain, but you can see the difference. You can see that it has also grooves and folds. What do you call the folds again, class? The folds are called gyrus. Okay, what about the groove? The sulcus. Perfect. Okay. So apparently therefore we need to know these things, right? For what purpose? When you dissect the ship's brain, it's similar to the human brain. You study the brain model and the skull. You protect the brain. But in relation to what you have just learned today, we talked about the importance of this subject in terms of your future career as nurses. So today, let me just recapitulate or recap. We studied the structure of the brain. What else? We studied of the skull and the meninges. And it's important to your role as nurses in the future. If you have any questions, raise your hand. Or if anything that you want to clarify, is there any question, class? There is none. Okay. Thank you so much. So again, we can continue with what you're doing. Okay. Very good.